The howling wind cut across the platform like a blade, but it was her sobs that caught Samuel Calloway's attention as he stepped off the late evening train in Centralia, Wyoming Territory. February 1884 was proving to be one of the cruelest winters anyone could remember, and there she sat, a young woman in a wedding dress, her tears freezing on her cheeks, abandoned and alone. Samuel pulled his sheepskin coat tighter and approached cautiously. "Madam, are you all right?" Her head snapped up, revealing a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't twisted in anguish and reddened by the cold. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, was soiled at the hem, and she clutched a small valise to her chest like it contained her last earthly possessions. "He's not coming," she whispered through chattering teeth. "He was supposed to be here. 3 days I've waited." Samuel glanced around at the deserted train platform. The station master had already locked up and gone home for the night, leaving only an oil lamp burning outside. The temperature was dropping dangerously, and the next train wasn't due until morning. "You can't stay here, miss. You'll freeze to death before dawn." He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Samuel Calloway. I've got a ranch about 5 miles out of town." "Madeline Voss," she replied, her voice barely audible above the wind. Or it would have been Madeline Reynolds by now. Fresh tears welled in her eyes. "Miss Voss, I don't mean to intrude on your sorrow, but you'll die if you stay out here tonight." He offered his hand. "I can take you to the hotel in town." "I have no money," she interrupted, embarrassment coloring her voice. "I spent everything I had on the train ticket from Chicago." Samuel considered his options. Leaving her was unthinkable, but taking an unmarried woman to his ranch would cause talk. Then again, she might not survive until morning without proper shelter. "My sister lives with me," he said, deciding it was best to offer this reassurance. "You'll be proper as Sunday at my place until we can figure out what to do come morning." Madeline hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand. She was 21 years old and had traveled halfway across the country to marry a man who had apparently abandoned her. What choice did she have? "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," she said finally, placing her gloved hand in his. Samuel helped her to her feet and was alarmed at how much she swayed. "How long since you've eaten, Miss Voss?" "Yesterday morning, I think. I was saving what little I had." Samuel nodded grimly and guided her toward the livery where he'd left his horse. "Brace yourself. The ride won't be comfortable in that dress, but we need to get you warm before the frostbite sets in." The livery was mercifully warmer than the platform. Samuel's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Chester, nickered softly when they entered. Samuel helped Madeline onto the saddle before mounting behind her. He wrapped his coat around them both as best he could, acutely aware of the impropriety but more concerned with her survival. "Hold tight, Miss Voss. We'll be home soon." The ride was brutal. The wind whipped snow into their faces, and Madeline's wedding dress offered little protection against the elements. She leaned back against Samuel's chest, drawing what warmth she could from his body. Despite the cold, she noted the strength in his arms as he guided the horse through the darkness, the confidence in his movements. He smelled of leather and pine, and something indefinably masculine that made her feel safe despite her dire circumstances. Samuel's ranch appeared as a glowing beacon in the darkness, a 2-story cabin with light spilling from the windows. As they approached, a woman appeared in the doorway, her silhouette backlit by the fire inside. "Samuel, is that you?" "I was getting worried." The woman stopped short when she saw Madeline. "Who on earth?" "Sarah, this is Miss Madeline Voss," Samuel explained as he dismounted and then gently helped Madeline down. "She was left stranded at the depot." "Miss Voss, this is my sister, Sarah Calloway." Madeline could barely stand, her limbs stiff with cold. Sarah immediately took charge, ushering Madeline inside while Samuel tended to Chester. "You poor thing, you're half frozen," Sarah exclaimed, helping Madeline to a chair by the fire. "Let's get you out of that wet dress and into something warm." Madeline allowed herself to be led upstairs to a small bedroom where Sarah helped her change into a flannel nightgown and thick woolen stockings. The simple act of removing her wedding dress felt symbolic, the final acknowledgement that her dreams of marriage had been shattered. By the time Samuel entered the house, Madeline was seated by the fire wrapped in quilts, a steaming mug of broth in her hands. The color was slowly returning to her cheeks, though her eyes remained haunted. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Samuel hung his coat by the door and warmed his hands by the fire. "No need for thanks. No decent man would leave a woman to freeze." Sarah brought a plate of beans, biscuits, and dried beef. "Eat slowly," she cautioned Madeline. "Your stomach won't be used to food after going without." As Madeline ate, Samuel recounted how he'd found her. "Who was supposed to meet you, if you don't mind my asking?" Madeline set down her fork, her appetite suddenly diminished. "Robert Reynolds. We corresponded for 6 months after he placed an advertisement in a Chicago newspaper seeking a bride. He sent me the train fare and promised to meet me at the station." Her voice broke. "He described himself as a successful rancher with a fine home." Samuel and Sarah exchanged glances. They knew of Robert Reynolds, a drifter who'd passed through Centralia last summer, working odd jobs and running up debts before disappearing. "Miss Voss, I don't know how to tell you this gently," Samuel began, "but Reynolds left these parts months ago. He was no rancher. Just a smooth-talking gambler who never stayed in one place for long." The color drained from Madeline's face. "You're certain?" Samuel nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so. He owed money all over town." Madeline set down her mug, her hands trembling. The full reality of her situation crashed down upon her. She was alone in a strange town, penniless, with no family or friends to turn to. "What will I do?" she whispered, more to herself than to her hosts. Sarah squeezed her hand. "Tonight you'll rest. Tomorrow we'll figure things out. You can stay here as long as you need to." Samuel nodded in agreement. "Sarah's right. You're welcome here until you decide what's next." Madeline looked up at the kind faces of these strangers who had taken her in. I can work. I was a seamstress in Chicago, and I can cook and clean. I won't be a burden, I promise." Samuel smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "We'll talk about all that tomorrow. For now, you need sleep." That night, as Madeline lay in Sarah's spare nightgown in the small guest room, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howling outside. She thought of Robert's letters, filled with promises and sweet words, and how easily she had believed them. She thought of her parents' disapproval when she announced her plans to marry a stranger in Wyoming. "You'll regret this foolishness," her father had said. Perhaps he had been right. But then she thought of Samuel Calloway's steady presence, his quiet strength as he'd rescued her from the bitter cold. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy that Robert's letters had never conveyed. As she drifted off to sleep, Madeline wondered what fate had in store for her in this wild, unforgiving land. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Madeline woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, but then the events of the previous night came flooding back. She dressed quickly in the clothes Sarah had left for her, a simple brown skirt and white blouse that were slightly too large but clean and warm. Downstairs, she found Sarah at the stove and Samuel pulling on his coat. "Good morning, Miss Voss," Samuel said, tipping his hat. "I hope you slept well." Better than I expected, thank you, Madeline replied. She felt strangely shy in the daylight, aware of the imposition she represented. I need to check on the cattle, Samuel explained. We've got a small herd wintering in the south pasture. This cold snap has me worried. Sarah placed a plate of food on the table. Sit, eat. Samuel will be back by midday and we can discuss what comes next. After Samuel departed, Sarah sat with Madeline over coffee. Tell me about Chicago, she prompted gently. Madeline described her life as a seamstress, working long hours in a dress shop, saving every penny. After my mother died 2 years ago, there was nothing keeping me there. Father remarried quickly a woman who made it clear I was unwelcome in their home. She stared into her coffee. When I saw Robert's advertisement, it seemed like providence, a chance to start fresh, to have a home of my own. Sarah's expression was sympathetic but not pitying. Many women have come west on such promises. Some find happiness, others disappointment. And you, Madeline asked, have you always lived here? Sarah smiled wryly. Samuel and I came from Pennsylvania 5 years ago after our parents died. He had dreams of building something of his own, away from the coal mines that killed our father. She gestured around the comfortable but modest home. We started with nothing but determination. Now we have 100 acres, 30 head of cattle and this house. Madeline was impressed. You've accomplished a great deal. It hasn't been easy, Sarah admitted, especially for a woman alone. That's why I understand your situation better than you might think. After breakfast, Sarah showed Madeline around the house and property. The ranch was small compared to some in the area but well maintained. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a vegetable garden now dormant under snow, and a small orchard of apple trees. It's beautiful, Madeline said sincerely. In spring, it's even better, Sarah replied. The wildflowers carpet the hills and the creek runs full. As promised, Samuel returned at midday, stomping snow from his boots at the door. 2 calves born last night, he announced, both healthy despite the cold. Over lunch, they discussed Madeline's options. The town of Centralia had limited employment opportunities for a single woman. Mrs. Peterson at the general store might need help, Sarah suggested. Or perhaps the hotel needs a maid. Samuel frowned. Those jobs barely pay enough to live on, and boarding at the hotel would eat up most of her wages. Madeline straightened her shoulders. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Calloway, and I'm a skilled seamstress. Perhaps I could take in mending and alterations. That's a thought, Samuel agreed. But it would take time to establish such a business. In the meantime, he hesitated, glancing at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. In the meantime, we could use help here. Spring calving is upon us, and Sarah's been talking about expanding her vegetable garden. We could offer room and board plus a small wage. Madeline's eyes widened. You would do that for a stranger? Samuel's gaze was direct. You wouldn't be a stranger for long, and we could use the help, truly. Madeline looked between brother and sister, searching for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. I would be grateful for the opportunity, at least until I can establish myself. And so Madeline Voss began her new life at the Calloway ranch. The first few days were a period of adjustment. Though she had grown up in a working-class family, city life hadn't prepared her for the rigors of ranch work. Her hands blistered from collecting eggs and feeding chickens. Her back ached from helping Sarah with laundry, and she was constantly cold despite the layers of borrowed clothing. But there were unexpected joys, too. The breathtaking beauty of sunrise over the snow-covered plains, the satisfaction of kneading dough for bread that would feed them all, the warmth of the kitchen in the evening as the 3 of them sat around the table, talking and laughing. Samuel, she discovered, was a man of few words but deep thoughts. When he did speak, It was with careful consideration and often surprising insight. He had educated himself through books, and in the evenings he sometimes read aloud from volumes of poetry or history. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Madeline found Samuel alone in the barn, treating a mare's injured leg. "May I help?" she asked, stepping into the warm, hay-scented space. Samuel glanced up, surprised. "Of course. Could you hold the lantern closer?" Madeline complied, watching as his large, capable hands gently cleaned the wound. There was such tenderness in his touch, such care for the animal's comfort. "You're good with her," Madeline observed. Samuel smiled slightly. "Daisy was my first purchase when we came west. She's carried me thousands of miles." He stroked the mare's neck. "Animals are honest creatures. They don't pretend to be something they're not." Madeline heard the unspoken comparison to Robert Reynolds, unlike some people. Samuel finished bandaging the leg and straightened. In the lantern light, his features seemed softer, his blue eyes reflecting the flame. "I'm sorry about what happened to you, Miss Voss. No one deserves such treatment." "Please call me Madeline," she said impulsively. "After all, we live in the same house now." He nodded, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Madeline, then. And I'm Samuel, not Mr. Calloway." Something shifted between them in that moment, a small but significant change, like ice beginning to thaw at the edges. February gave way to March, bringing slightly warmer temperatures but also the busiest time of year for the ranch. The rest of the herd began calving, requiring constant vigilance. Samuel often spent nights in the barn, checking on laboring cows, and Madeline found herself volunteering to bring him hot meals and coffee. One night, a particularly difficult birth kept Samuel in the barn until dawn. Madeline arrived with a thermos of coffee and fresh biscuits to find him asleep on a pile of hay, a newborn calf nestled against him. The sight stirred something in her chest, admiration, certainly, but also a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee in her hands. She knelt beside him, hesitating to wake him but knowing he would want to eat. "Samuel," she said softly, touching his shoulder. He woke instantly, years of ranch life having trained him to light sleep. For a moment he seemed disoriented, then his gaze focused on her face. "Madeline." "I brought you breakfast," she said, suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. "You've been out here all night." He sat up, careful not to disturb the sleeping calf. "Mother didn't make it," he said grimly. "This little one is an orphan now." Madeline's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. "What will happen to it? We'll have to bottle feed him. It's a lot of work, but—" He trailed off, running a gentle hand over the calf's head. "I'll help," Madeline offered immediately. "Just show me what to do." Samuel's grateful smile made her heart skip a beat. "You're becoming quite the rancher, Madeline Voss," she laughed, handing him a biscuit. "Hardly, but I'm learning." Over the following weeks, the orphaned calf became Madeline's special project. She named him Charlie and fed him every few hours, often rising in the night to prepare his bottle. Samuel taught her how to mix the formula, how to hold the bottle at the right angle, how to check for signs of illness or distress. During these sessions, they really talked in a way they hadn't before. Samuel told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he hoped to expand their herd and perhaps build a larger house someday. Madeline shared stories of her childhood in Chicago, her mother's illness, her father's emotional distance. "I've never told anyone these things," she confessed one evening as they sat in the barn, Charlie contentedly drinking from the bottle she held. "Why me?" Samuel asked, genuinely curious. Madeline considered the question. "I suppose because you listen, not just with your ears but with your heart." The words hung between them, fraught with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Samuel cleared his throat and changed the subject. but his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary. As March turned to April, the snow began to melt, revealing patches of muddy ground and, eventually, tender green shoots of new grass. The landscape transformed, and so did Madeline. Her city pallor gave way to a healthy glow from working outdoors. Her hands grew stronger, her confidence more apparent. She no longer jumped at the sound of coyotes howling at night or flinched when the wind rattled the windows. Sarah noticed the change in her brother, too. He smiled more readily, laughed more often, and took greater care with his appearance. One evening, after Madeline had gone upstairs to bed, Sarah confronted him. "You're falling in love with her, aren't you?" Samuel, normally so composed, flushed to the roots of his hair. "Sarah, don't deny it," his sister interrupted. "I see how you look at her when you think no one's watching." Samuel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Even if I were interested, she's still recovering from a significant betrayal. And she's dependent on us for her livelihood right now. It wouldn't be right." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Always the honorable one. Did it occur to you that she might feel the same way? That perhaps healing is exactly what you both need?" Samuel had no answer for that, but his sister's words echoed in his mind as he lay awake that night, listening to the spring peepers singing in the creek near the house. The next day brought unexpected news. Sarah returned from a trip to town with a letter for Madeline from her father in Chicago. Madeline read it with trembling hands, her expression cycling through surprise, hurt, and finally resignation. "My father is remarrying," she told the siblings over dinner. "He's selling our family home and moving to Boston with his new wife. He says I should return to Chicago and join them." Her voice was hollow, emotionless. Samuel felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. "Will you go?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Madeline folded the letter carefully. "He's not asking me to come, he's ordering me, as if I were still a child." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But I'm not a child anymore, and I don't think I could bear to live as an unwanted appendage to his new marriage." Relief flooded Samuel, followed immediately by guilt. It was selfish to want her to stay, especially when she had so few options. "Whatever you decide, know that you have a place here for as long as you wish," he said. Madeline smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." That night, unable to sleep, Madeline wandered downstairs for a glass of water. She was surprised to find Samuel sitting at the kitchen table, a single lamp burning low, a book open before him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, closing the book. She shook her head. "Too many thoughts." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you like to share them?" Madeline sat, acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment, the two of them alone in the quiet house, the soft light casting shadows on his face. "I was thinking about choices, how sometimes what seems like the sensible choice isn't what your heart wants." Samuel was still for a long moment. "And what does your heart want, Madeline?" The directness of his question took her breath away. She looked at him, really looked at him, noting the strength in his jawline, the kindness in his eyes, the slight nervousness in the way he waited for her answer. "It wants to stay," she admitted softly. "Here in Wyoming, with—" She couldn't finish, suddenly afraid of misreading the situation. Samuel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "With me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Madeline nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Is that foolish? After Robert, I promised myself I wouldn't be so naive again." Samuel's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "There's a difference between naivete and hope, Madeline, and there's a difference between men like Reynolds and—" He paused, gathering his courage. "And men like me." "Men like you," she repeated, turning her hand so their palms met, fingers intertwining. "Honest men, kind men, Men who rescue crying brides from train stations. A smile tugged at his lips. I'd rescue you again in a heartbeat, though preferably without the crying part. Madeline laughed softly, the sound warming the kitchen. I don't plan on being abandoned at any more train stations. Good, Samuel said firmly. Then, more hesitantly, Madeline, I know it's soon, and I know you came here under difficult circumstances, but I've grown to care for you, deeply. Madeline felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were different from the desperate sobs of that February night. These were tears of something like joy or relief, or perhaps both. I've grown to care for you too, Samuel, more than I thought possible. His smile broadened, transforming his face. Then will you stay? Not as our hired help, but as— He faltered, suddenly uncertain. As what? Madeline prompted gently. Samuel took a deep breath. As a woman being properly courted by a man who admires and respects her. I won't rush you, Madeline. We can take all the time you need. Madeline felt a rush of affection for this man who had saved her in more ways than one. I would like that very much. The next morning, Sarah took one look at them across the breakfast table and broke into a wide smile. Well, it's about time, she declared, making them both blush. Spring blossomed fully, bringing with it the hard work of planting and the joy of new beginnings. Samuel and Madeline's courtship was conducted in stolen moments between chores, a brush of hands while mending fences, conversations under starlit skies after dinner, shared laughter as they taught Charlie the orphaned calf to graze. In late April, Samuel took Madeline into town for the first time since her arrival. Centralia was small but growing, with a main street boasting a general store, a hotel, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other businesses. People stared curiously at Madeline, rumors of her arrival having spread through town. Pay them no mind, Samuel murmured as they stepped into the general store. Small towns run on gossip. Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, approached with undisguised interest. You must be the young lady staying with the Calloways. How nice to finally meet you. Madeline smiled politely. Madeline Voss. It's a pleasure, Mrs. Peterson. Such a shame about your situation, the older woman continued, her eyes alight with curiosity. Left at the altar, as it were. And by that ne'er-do-well Reynolds. You're fortunate Samuel found you when he did. Madeline felt Samuel stiffen beside her. Yes, I am fortunate, she agreed, slipping her hand into his. The gesture was not lost on Mrs. Peterson, whose eyebrows shot up. Well, the woman exclaimed. Isn't this a development? Samuel cleared his throat. We're courting properly, Mrs. Peterson, and would appreciate your discretion. The woman smiled knowingly. Of course, and may I say you make a handsome couple. She leaned closer to Madeline. He's a good man, that's Samuel Calloway, the best in the county if you ask me. Madeline squeezed Samuel's hand. I know. As they continued their shopping, Madeline became aware of the stares and whispers following them. Some were curious, others approving, and a few, particularly from young women, distinctly disappointed. You're quite the catch in Centralia, it seems, Madeline observed as they left the store. Samuel looked genuinely surprised. What do you mean? Those girls were looking at you like you're the last biscuit at breakfast, she teased. Sarah was right when she said you never notice these things. Samuel shook his head, bemused. The only woman I'm interested in noticing is you, Madeline Voss. Before she could respond, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A man was staggering out of the saloon, clearly drunk despite the early hour. He collided with a hitching post, cursed loudly, then froze when he caught sight of them. Well, I'll be damned, he slurred, his gaze fixed on Madeline. If it ain't my mail-order bride. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. Robert Reynolds was nothing like the handsome, successful rancher he described in his letters. He was thin to the point of gauntness, with bloodshot eyes and several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were dirty and wrinkled, his boots worn through at the toes. "In the flesh," he confirmed with a mocking bow. "Come to claim what's mine." Samuel stepped slightly in front of Madeline, his posture rigid. "You lost any claim when you abandoned her at the station, Reynolds. She nearly died of exposure." Robert waved a dismissive hand. "Had some business down in Denver. Got delayed. Not my fault the train schedule's unreliable." He focused his bleary gaze on Madeline. "But I'm back now, darling, ready to make good on my promises." Madeline found her voice, steel entering her tone. "There's nothing for you here, Mr. Reynolds. Whatever was between us ended the moment you left me to freeze." Robert's expression darkened. "Now see here, I paid good money for your train ticket. You owe me." Samuel's hands clenched into fists. "She owes you nothing. Leave Reynolds while you still can." A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with interest. Robert looked around, seemingly gauging his support among the onlookers. Finding none, he spat on the ground. "Fine, keep the frigid bitch. Wasn't worth the trouble anyway." He turned to leave, then paused. "But I want my money back. That ticket cost me $20. Before Samuel could respond, Sheriff Tom Davis stepped forward from the crowd. "Reynolds, you've been banned from my town once already for not paying your debts. I suggest you leave before I decide to escort you to the county line personally." Robert assessed the situation: the angry sheriff, the hostile crowd, Samuel's imposing presence, and evidently decided retreat was his best option. "This ain't over," he muttered. Stumbling away toward the livery, Sheriff Davis turned to Madeline. "Miss Voss, I presume. I've heard about your situation. If that man bothers you again, you let me know." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Samuel placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "We should head back to the ranch. Reynolds might be fool enough to come looking for trouble." The ride home was tense, both of them processing the encounter. Madeline was quiet, lost in thought, and Samuel respected her need for silence. When they reached the ranch, Sarah took one look at their faces and demanded to know what had happened. After they explained, she was furious. That miserable excuse for a man. How dare he show his face here after what he did? "It's all right, Sarah," Madeline said, though her hands trembled slightly. "It's over now, but it wasn't quite over." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Madeline finally spoke about what had been bothering her. "When I saw him today, really saw him, not the man I'd imagined from his letters, I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, not even disappointment, just nothing." She turned to Samuel. "Is that strange?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "No, I don't think so. Maybe it means you've moved on. Maybe it means what you thought you felt for him wasn't real to begin with." "What I feel for you is real," she said softly. "I know that now." Samuel reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm glad, because what I feel for you grows stronger every day." In that moment, with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samuel Calloway kissed Madeline Voss for the first time. It was a tender kiss, full of promise and possibility, and when they parted, both were smiling. "I think I've been waiting to do that since the moment I found you at the depot," Samuel admitted. Madeline laughed. "Even when I was a sobbing mess in a ruined wedding dress." "Even then," he confirmed. "Though I'll admit, you're even more beautiful when you're smiling." May brought warmer weather and the blooming of wildflowers across the ranch. Madeline, now firmly established as Samuel's sweetheart rather than the ranch's hired help, found herself settling into a rhythm of life that felt increasingly natural. She learned to ride, first on gentle Daisy, and later on a spirited mare named Pepper that Samuel insisted was perfect for her. "She's got fire like you," he explained when Madeline questioned his choice. I have fire, Madeline asked, surprised by the characterization. Samuel nodded seriously. A quiet flame, but steady and strong. I saw it that very first night when you were determined to survive despite everything. Life wasn't without its challenges. Robert Reynolds lingered in town for several days, making vague threats and spreading malicious gossip about Madeline's character before Sheriff Davis finally ran him out for good. The incident left Madeline shaken but more determined than ever to build a life in Centralia. I won't let him drive me away, she told Samuel firmly. This is my home now. The word home hung between them, laden with meaning. Samuel had been contemplating asking Madeline to make their arrangement permanent, but something held him back, a fear, perhaps, that it was still too soon, that she might regret committing to him and to the demanding life of a rancher's wife. Sarah had no such reservations. Ask her, Samuel, she urged one afternoon as they mended a fence together. Anyone with eyes can see she loves you. Samuel drove a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. It hasn't even been 3 months since she arrived. Sometimes 3 months is enough, Sarah countered. Sometimes 3 minutes is enough. When it's right, it's right. And if she says no, Sarah rolled her eyes. She won't say no. But even if she did, wouldn't you rather know where you stand? Samuel couldn't argue with that logic, but still he hesitated. Until, that is, the incident with the rattlesnake. It happened on a warm afternoon in late May. Madeline was gathering eggs while Samuel repaired a loose board on the chicken coop. Neither of them noticed the rattlesnake coiled in the shade until it struck, missing Madeline's ankle by inches. Samuel reacted instantly, pulling Madeline away and dispatching the snake with a shovel. It was over in seconds, but the close call left them both shaken. You could have been killed, Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion as he pulled her into his arms. Madeline clung to him, her heart racing. But I wasn't, thanks to you. That night, unable to sleep, Samuel found himself at Madeline's bedroom door. He hesitated, then knocked softly. She opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. She was in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders, and the sight of her made his heart ache with longing and love. I can't stop thinking about what happened today, he said without preamble. About how quickly everything can change, how precious life is. Madeline stepped back, inviting him into her room. It was improper, they both knew, but in that moment, propriety seemed less important than the words that needed to be said. I've been thinking the same thing, she admitted, sitting on the edge of her bed. About time and chances and not wasting either. Samuel remained standing, too nervous to sit. Madeline, I had a whole speech planned. I was going to take you up to the ridge where you can see all the way to the mountains. I was going to do this properly. Madeline's eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. Samuel, I love you, he blurted out. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love how you throw yourself into ranch life even when it's hard. I love watching you with Charlie and the other animals. He took a deep breath. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me. Tears filled Madeline's eyes, but they were tears of joy. Samuel Calloway, are you proposing to me in my nightgown in the middle of the night? A smile tugged at his lips despite his nervousness. It appears I am. Rather badly, too. Madeline stood, crossing the short distance between them. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. It's not bad at all, it's perfect because it's real. Like you. Like us. Is that a yes? He asked, hardly daring to hope. Yes, she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. 1,000 times yes. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Centralia. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, with wildflowers decorating the altar and sunlight streaming through the windows. Sarah stood as Madeline's maid of honor, beaming with approval, while Samuel's friend from a neighboring ranch served as best man. Madeline wore a dress she had sewn herself, not white this time, but a soft blue that brought out the color of her eyes. "No more wedding dresses that end in tears," she had declared when choosing the fabric. As they exchanged vows, Madeline thought back to that freezing February night when she had sat alone and abandoned at the train depot. How close she had come to a very different fate. How fortunate she was that Samuel Calloway had stepped off that train and into her life. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors and townspeople gathering to celebrate. Even Mrs. Peterson was gracious, admitting that things had worked out for the best. "It was meant to be," the storekeeper's wife declared, raising her glass in a toast. Sometimes the good Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing people together when they least expect it. As the celebration continued around them, Samuel led Madeline away from the crowd, toward the creek where they had spent so many evenings talking and dreaming. "Happy, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, still savoring the sound of her new name. Madeline looked up at him, at this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "And grateful." Samuel's brow furrowed. "Grateful for what?" "For the worst day of my life," she said, surprising him. "For being abandoned at that depot, for nearly freezing to death." She reached up to touch his face. "Because without all of that, I might never have found you." Samuel turned his head to kiss her palm. "I'd have found you somehow," he said with certainty. "If not at the depot, then somewhere else. Some things are just meant to be." As the sun set on their wedding day, painting the Wyoming sky in breathtaking colors, Madeline knew he was right. Their meeting had not been mere chance or coincidence. It had been the beginning of a love story written in the stars long before either of them had known it. The years that followed brought both joy and hardship, as years tend to do. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, growing in size and reputation. Sarah eventually married a schoolteacher who came to Centralia in the fall of 1885, moving into a small house in town, but remaining a constant presence in their lives. Charlie, the orphaned calf, grew into a fine bull, the cornerstone of their expanding herd. Madeline established a small business making and altering clothing for townsfolk, her skilled needlework in high demand. And in the spring of 1886, she gave Samuel the news he'd been hoping for. They were expecting their first child. Joseph Samuel Calloway was born on a crisp October morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, and from his earliest days, it was clear he would be a perfect blend of them both. Two more children followed, Emma in 1888 and William in 1891, completing their family and filling the ranch house with laughter, tears, and all the beautiful chaos of family life. On cold winter evenings, when the children begged for stories, Madeline would often tell them how she and their father met. "Your papa rescued me," she would say, "on the coldest night of the year when I was alone and afraid. Like a night in a fairy tale." Emma would exclaim, her eyes wide with wonder. Samuel would shake his head, embarrassed by such grand comparisons. Not a night, just a man who couldn't leave a lady in distress. But privately, in moments when they were alone, he would admit that finding Madeline had been the single most important moment of his life. "You think I rescued you," he would tell her, "but the truth is, you rescued me right back, from loneliness, from a life half-lived." And Madeline, thinking of that desperate young woman she had once been, weeping on a deserted train platform with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, would marvel at how completely her life had transformed. From abandonment to belonging, from despair to joy, from the bitter cold of that February night to the enduring warmth of Samuel's love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Madeline with a gift, a small gold locket containing a tiny photograph of them with their children. Engraved on the back were the words "From the depot to forever." "To remind you," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones, that endings can become beginnings, that love can find you even when you think all is lost." Madeline touched the locket, tears in her eyes. "I've never forgotten," she assured him, "not for a single day." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching their children play in the yard and their cattle graze in the distance, Madeline reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this place. How a broken heart had led to a healed one. How a failed promise had led to 1,000 kept ones. How a man's cruelty had ultimately led her to a man's kindness. And how a cowboy, finding a crying bride alone at a depot, had changed not only her life but his own as well, creating a love story that would be told and retold for generations to come. For in the end, that was what their story had become, not a tale of abandonment and rescue, but of two people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. A reminder that even in the harshest winter, spring always follows. That even in the darkest moments, light awaits. That even when all seems lost, love can still be found, sometimes in the most unexpected places, at the most unexpected times, with the most unexpected person. And sometimes, just sometimes, that unexpected love turns out to be the most perfect love of all.